Mrs. President, thank you very much. Our next speaker, let's hear from Carlos Ghosn, a man who probably needs very little introduction, but just for the record again, President and CEO of both Renault and also Nissan.
The main objective of where we would like to contribute is the Asian leadership which is shaping up in the 21st century. Everybody senses that Asia is going to play a bigger role. Everybody sees it concretely, but there are a lot of open questions. How are you going to establish a common agenda between countries, Asian countries, playing a big role, but still very distant in terms of positioning, like Japan, China, India, Korea, or the ASEAN? How concretely are you going to bring a common agenda between the different countries, not only on key regional issues, key Asian issues, but also on some of the concerns that the world has. For example, global warming or climate change. But it's not only about this issue, it's also about how to rebalance the economies in Asia. Today the prevailing model is still a model based on investments and exports. There is time to develop internal consumption. How are you going to do it so Asia can play a bigger role, not only as a producer, but also as a consumer at the level of the economy? How are you going to, in a certain way, bring more innovation from Asia? I'm not saying that today there are no innovations. There are a lot of areas where Asian companies are taking leadership roles. Just to nominate two obvious ones, the car industry, there is no doubt of the fact that Japan is taking a leadership role, not only in terms of technology, but also in terms of systems. In electronics, where Korea and Japan also are playing leadership roles, there are many areas where Asia is coming up as an innovator. But there are still also many other areas where we can question, what we have to do in order to unleash this creativity and this innovation in order for Asia to bring a reasonable contribution to innovative systems in the world.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Ghosn there. Next up, let's hear from Mari Pangestu from the Republic of Indonesia, the Minister of Trade. Ma'am.
Yeah, in addressing the questions posed to us, I think, first of all, if you note what's been happening in the last 2 or 3 decades, East Asia has been the leader in trade and global integration, and this has actually contributed a lot to the growth in the region. So I think the big challenge out there is what leadership role East Asia should play to continue this, given uncertainties in the multilateral trading system. As you know, last week there was hope that G4 would make some breakthrough, but it didn't happen. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the multilateral trading system, and what's happening is a proliferation of regional and bilateral free trade agreements. And East Asia is in a unique position, I think, to take leadership role in that respect. And in that sense, we must, I think we have to play a dual role in, first of all, I think we all believe that the multilateral trading system is still the most important system. So we need to still play a leadership role in ensuring that there's continued and hopefully completion of these talks. But at the same time, we will be having to manage proliferation of regional and bilateral trade agreements, which are already happening, and in the likelihood that there will be some greater uncertainty in the multilateral trading system, it's likely to increase in proliferation. And here I think the big question out there is, what is the regional architecture going to look like? Is it ASEAN, ASEAN Economic Community at the heart, with ASEAN +1, with China, Korea? We already have FTAs with China and Korea, India, Australia, and Japan. Or is it going to be ASEAN +3, or is it going to be ASEAN +6? I think Madam President mentioned the notion of an East Asian community. How would the architecture look like in terms of institutional structure, in terms of the policies that will come out? And here I think it should not be just the governments that play a role. I really think the businesses are the ones that have to weigh in on this, because the greatest fear for proliferation of these regional agreements is obviously this noodle bowl or spaghetti bowl effect, where you businesses are going to have to face different tariff schedules, different rules of origin to produce the same product to service different markets. So I think the business sector here must also take a leadership role. If you want the value-added chain, the regional production center in East Asia to really be dynamic and for countries to be complementary, then the business sector needs to weigh in to make sure that the proliferation are going to be serving all our needs. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Pangestu, thank you very much. Let's hear next from Ong Keng Yong. You've heard ASEAN mentioned several times. Mr. Ong, of course, is Secretary General of ASEAN. Mr. Ong.
Thank you, Martin. As you have heard, what ASEAN is doing today is to build a community, not just only the economic community, but security as well as socio-cultural community. Basically, what we are hoping to do is to provide peace and stability in the region, Southeast Asia, that is, for economic growth. In the last few years, we have gone one step further to convince every one of you out there that we are serious. You are used to all the cynicism about ASEAN being a talk shop, so we are now focused on two other things. One is to draft a charter. This year is the 40th anniversary of ASEAN establishment back in 1967. But we have not gotten a charter. We operate in a very informal, flexible way. But as we move into this new era, we thought that it will be important to have more accountability, predictability, transparency. So we have embarked on this process of drafting a charter, which we hope will provide more indication of our seriousness and our commitment to regional dialogue and cooperation. So doing the charter is not an impossible thing. It is difficult, but we believe that the leadership provided by the political authorities in Southeast Asian countries will steer us toward that objective. The other thing that we are doing, as you heard Madam President Arroyo, is to maintain what we call the centrality of ASEAN. We believe that we have polished up our regional cooperation and dialogue capacity, our skills in bringing people together to talk about regional cooperation and all the associated issues are not bad, and we have achieved some good results. For example, we initiated this thing called the ASEAN Plus 3, which basically cover ASEAN country 10, and with China, Japan, Korea, and in the last year or two, we have also involved India, Australia, and New Zealand into what we call East Asian Summit. And at the same time, we continue to engage other interested big economies like the United States of America, Russia, the European Union. So we feel that this centrality of ASEAN is a critical element in trying to develop further processes, further economic cooperation program, which will contribute to integrating the East Asian economies. So looking at this set of activities, community building, charter drafting, and centrality driving, as we call it, we believe that we can contribute to a predictable way in which our East Asian countries can work together and integrate their economy. However, we always recognize that there is a deficit here. Our leadership has provided the vision and the commitment, but in terms of implementation, maybe we can get a better job done. So in the coming 1 to 2 years, you will see the leadership of ASEAN very much focused on implementation. If we just implement many of the things that we have agreed on in the last 40 years, Southeast Asia and its East Asian neighbors will be a very different place altogether. So we are looking at all this now to see how we can move in a step-by-step evolutionary way. The success of ASEAN has always been that we have been moving along at a pace comfortable to all. The processes have been always stressed to be more important than the outcome sometimes. Perhaps we need to change, especially in this very competitive environment, and there are so many other economies out there pushing ahead with their respective plans. But I believe that in the coming 1 to 2 years, the political leadership of ASEAN will be moving to implement many of the things that we have agreed upon, and this will help to reassure many of the national bureaucracy to go beyond the national perspective and think about regional concern and develop ASEAN into a credible partner to bring all the other interested powers of the world to cooperate in a very peaceful and mutually beneficial way in the region. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Ong, thank you very much. Next, let's hear from Kim Byung-jun. He is chairman of the Presidential Commission on Policy Planning from the Republic of Korea. Sir.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to raise somewhat different issues. I'd like to talk about the income disparities, not between the countries or among the countries, but domestically. I mean, the rich and the poor in one country, like Korea or Japan and China. I think the income disparities in a country is not just one country's problem. It's becoming more and more global problem, because the income disparities is now weakening the purchasing power of ordinary people. That means that it might bring the shrinking of a consumption market, and it will hurt the global economy or the East Asian or Asian economy as a whole. Then I just think that the leaders in Asian politics or Asian economy should start to talk about the income disparities within a country. To discuss this, we have to understand that the causes or roots of the problem and the background of the problem. And in addition, I think we must be able to mobilize political and financial resources that we need to solve the problems. In case of Korea, we are suffering with the problems. And then we try to mobilize some financial resources, but it's very difficult to do because nobody wants to pay taxes. And in addition, the countries now is starting, we are facing the kind of tax competition between the countries. The corporate, especially, we see that in case of Korea, we reduced 2% of corporate taxes in the past 4 years, losing a lot of money. And then I'm also told that some other countries like Malaysia and Hong Kong and Japan are also planning to reduce the corporate tax. And then they are planning to reduce the heritage taxes too. That means that a country like Korea is becoming, we are facing more and more difficulties to raise the financial resources. I think we have to talk about it to resolve the problem, to mitigate the problem. Otherwise, as I told you that we are going to face the shrinking of consumer market, and it will bring also, so many difficulties in the East Asian or Asian economies. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Kim, thank you so much. And last but not least, from host Singapore, the Foreign Minister of the Republic of Singapore, George Yeo. Sir.
I'd like to concentrate my remarks on the challenges of urbanization and the importance of urban leadership in the coming years. Globalization is a huge phenomenon. Since the end of the Cold War, almost 3 billion people, mostly in Asia, mostly from China and India, are joining the global marketplace. So the entire playing field is changing rapidly, almost beyond recognition. Countries, cities, corporations, ethnic groups, families that respond well to globalization, they will surge ahead. Others who are trapped in the past because of encrusted vested interests and lack of leadership, they get left behind. And this differential response is leading to the income inequality which Dr. Kim has just talked about. And it's becoming a more serious problem in every country, in every city, and maybe in many families around the world. And unless we have good urban leadership, many of these problems will become more acute. We are seeing now a scale and a speed of urbanization in Asia, never seen before in human history. China, India, Vietnam, Southeast Asia, everywhere. Some cities are growing in a planned, methodical way, anticipating future needs. Others are growing in a higgledy-piggledy manner, becoming more congested and polluted. And beneath the level of cities, there are ethnic groups who are more global in their value system and conception. They respond quickly, they become wealthy. Others, holding value systems which are less suitable for the new age, they are foundering. And the result will be a sharpening of ethnic and religious conflicts in many societies, compounded by income disparity. And then politicized leadership which takes the side of one group versus another. So in Uttar Pradesh recently in India, we see voting completely along caste lines. It will be in the cities where all these problems will be concentrated. Political problems, economic problems, social problems, religious problems, ethnic problems. So it is at that level that leadership will be the most critical. You create a good environment, you resolve problems, you anticipate them, you bring ethnic religious leaders together so that people help each other. That society will streak ahead. Others will spend all their time trying to resolve the internal conflicts, leaving behind opportunities. So we look ahead. Cities can either become shining nodes of globalization, or they can become festering grounds for violence, crime, extremism, unhappinesses. And it is at that level of urban leadership where the main challenge of urbanization will have to be tackled. It is a global tide which is flowing. It will not raise all ships. Those ships which are leaking, they will get into trouble. Others which are still anchored will not get very far. But those which have set sail with crews already, they'll be far ahead. And this disparity will in turn create a new set of global and political problems, not the least of which is the floundering talks at the WTO. Thank you.
Mr. Yeo, thank you so much. All right, you've heard opening remarks, some prepared, some off the cuff from all of our panelists. Now what we're going to do is we'll start talking among ourselves, and then, of course, you will all have a chance towards the end to jump in as well with Q&A. I'd like to pick up with Mr. Yeo first. This leadership deficit, or the challenge, I guess, for a lot of governments, leadership in terms of urbanization. I'm sure most of you know that there is a fairly ambitious, maybe even radical experiment underway now here in Singapore, and I'd like to get Mr. Yeo to talk about that, and that is including a lot of other things, to try and almost double the size of the population in a very short period of time, partly move higher up the value-added ladder into services as part of this goal of becoming much more of a global city and perhaps hopefully a node for globalization. I'd like to ask Mr. Yeo, or BG, as I think a lot of people are more familiar with, what happens then at the end of it? 2015, 2030, Singapore's 7 million, 6.5, 7 million, increasingly globalized, higher paying jobs. It's going to look like, some people think, perhaps the Dubai of Southeast Asia, perhaps the Monaco of Southeast Asia because of the integrated resorts, the casinos coming up. My question to you is, what happens then, sir? Does sovereignty become an issue? Does national identity become an issue when conceivably you will have more foreigners than citizens living in your country, living and working there?
Well, these are all important challenges which will confront not just the leadership in Singapore, but the leadership in all cities in Asia. Either we rise to the challenge of globalization, which means more porous borders, attracting talent, keeping tax rates low, making sure that social infrastructure is properly invested in. All cities are in competition and learning from one another, watching over each other's shoulders, as it were. And those who respond successfully, they will be much better off than those which are unable to. Singapore, being a city-state, faces fewer constraints. We do not have farmers to worry about. We do not have a huge countryside to subsidize. We are educated. Our political system is geared towards meeting urban needs because there are no rural needs to look after. For this reason, in some respects, Singapore had an early start. If we were part of a larger polity, if we had remained in Malaysia, for instance, I think our response would have been less rapid. But as it is, by an accident of history, we are where we are. Being a front runner is both good and bad because you also make mistakes. You walk into holes and minefields, and it's for others to learn from our mistakes. I would describe Singapore as an experiment. It's an experiment which is of interest in many countries in Asia, which is being studied. I hope we will succeed. And if we do, then we'll remain a partner of CNBC and WEF. If we don't, we'll just be another footnote of failed cities.
Vijay, if I could just very quickly jump in. It seems to me what you're actually saying is urbanization is more of a challenge. In terms of the leadership, it sounds like, I guess what you're implicitly saying is political leadership, top-down, is still what is necessary to meet this urbanization challenge. Fair?
Political leadership is at the core because that settles everything else.
Mr. Ong, you wanted to jump in?
No, I wanted to mention that if you look at ASEAN today, the development of our urban areas is far ahead of the countryside. And if you look at every country in ASEAN, each one of us has a huge urban center. In fact, some countries 2 or 3. And actually the critical requirement is infrastructure development. Otherwise, all our industrialization, all our educational and other what we call socio-cultural activities will be concentrated in the cities. And unless we have a political leadership that is determined to spread this around, it will cause more problem later on. So what Minister Yeo said about urban leadership is important for the people in the urban centers really, and for our own country's respective policy priorities with regard to sustainable development, so on and so forth. But we in the ASEAN Secretariat see the next 5 years as critical because we need infrastructure development. If we don't push our roads and our bridges and our railway and airport out to the other part of the big geography that we have in Southeast Asia, then maybe after 5 years we will have to deal with a very serious set of problems that has to do with urban-rural divide. And that is a different challenge altogether.
Certainly. I mean, in Singapore's case, it is a city and a state at the same time. In the case of course, the Philippines and Indonesia, we're talking about relatively sprawling, in the case of Indonesia, very sprawling archipelagos. Also desperately in need of more infrastructure build-out. Mrs. President, if I could come to you with this. As far as this challenge of urbanization goes, how is the Philippines meeting it? We were talking just before we came on in the ante room, and you were saying how one of the big drivers for the economy continues to be remittances, the money sent home by expatriate overseas Filipinos. $13 billion a year at last count from 8 million Filipinos working overseas. That's roughly about 10% of the population. I don't mean to be a skeptic. I don't mean to be a critic. I'm just telling you what skeptics and critics are saying. As far as the economy in the Philippines goes, a lot of economists say, look, blessed with land, agriculture, etc., as long as it rains there, you've got 4% GDP growth automatically. The challenge for the government for so many years has been, how do you get above that, add to that? They would also say that you have 8 million people in the Philippines, where outside that is, because the government is not able to create enough jobs, enough high-paying jobs, enough skilled jobs to keep them at home to support their families. How would you respond to those critics? In other words, how are you meeting this challenge of urbanization?
Well, we really have inherited a history of economic lethargy, and we had to break out of that cycle by very difficult and painful reforms. And the single biggest and most painful reform was our value-added tax, which in one bold stroke raised enormous amounts of revenue and gave the signal that we are serious about turning our economy around. Now that we have this new revenue, we have to sustain the gains that we have made. We have to transform the pain into the gains of investing in long overdue human and physical infrastructure investments. And our efforts are beginning to bear fruit. In the first quarter of the year, we had a 6.9% growth rate. This is the culmination of, however, 26 uninterrupted quarters of economic growth. And if you're going to look at these 26 economic quarters, in the early parts of this century, other neighbors were experiencing recession, but we continued to grow. And maybe a part of that was because of our overseas workers who provided us with a consumption-led economy, while everybody else's export-led economy was suffering from the global decline in electronics electronics demand. But now that we have the money to spend on human and physical infrastructure, we can make this growth sustainable. And when you have human and physical infrastructure investments, then you attract private investments who will create jobs. And that is going to be what will lift our people out of poverty. We're very proud of our overseas Filipinos, but we long for the day when they will be able to find their jobs back home. When no Filipino has to go abroad for work, when going abroad will be a career option and not the only choice for a hardworking Filipino.
Ms. Mengistu, talk to us about the experience in Indonesia. The Philippines has just started coming back on the news radar. For the last several years, of course, Indonesia has been a little bit quiet, Malaysia as well. I just managed to talk to Pak Lutfi, the head of the Board of Investment, and he gave out some fairly stunning numbers. Investment is starting to come back into the country, no doubt off a low base, but the numbers are quite impressive.
Yes, I think we're seeing recovery, especially beginning the end of 2006. If you look at the most recent numbers, we have had a very strong growth and recovery in investment. I think if you look at the first, from beginning of the year to now, we have 2.8 billion inflow of short-term portfolio flows. If you look at the increase in reserves, it's like 7 billion, which indicates that on top of the portfolio, there must be also direct foreign investment also coming in. So I think this is, in a way, after having 2 years of undertaking reforms and managing, I think, to overcome a number of major external challenges as well as internal challenges. We had the natural disasters. We had the increase in the price of oil, which we translated domestically into increasing the price of fuel. In 2005, by 2 times, we increased the price of fuel, which then had a sort of a dampening effect on the economy. But I think since the middle of last year, we see a real pickup in growth in investment as well as consumption. So now I think the challenge for us is actually how do we maintain the reforms and implement the reforms. This is the crucial year for Indonesia.
Is the thought of these nodes of globalization, which Mr. Yeo was talking about, if you think about Jakarta becoming one of those nodes, and I have to ask you honestly, how far away are we from that?
Well, this is the big challenge. I think I wish you had given me not just a short-term outlook, but a longer-term outlook.
A longer-term outlook,
in the medium term, obviously, what Mr. Ong indicated, infrastructure is the key. I think, as I indicated, I think East Asia has succeeded in integrating itself globally, including Indonesia. But for you to succeed, you must have equitable distribution domestically, and that must mean urbanization is going to happen, and you're going to have to pull in the other areas. And that needs infrastructure. It's roads, and one of our biggest challenges is energy, electricity and gas, and water. I think we had not mentioned water, but water is a crucial issue. And of course, doing it in an environmentally sustainable way. These are actually the big challenge. So we have a huge demand for improving infrastructure. There's a lot of projects out there, but candidly speaking, of course, it takes up time to build roads. So it will happen only in the next 1 or 2 years. So the big question for us is right now, what do we do in the short term? In the short term, I think what we have to do is really just focus on what we call trade facilitation measures. To just look at deregulate a lot, facilitate the process of goods in and out, and process of people moving, etc., capital moving in and out, by debureaucratization, reducing red tape, and to the extent you can manage your harbors better and so on. This is the short term. But in the longer term, obviously, we have to come up with new and better infrastructure. Right. Just to end on the point which relates to ASEAN, the fact that we have to have the ASEAN single window by the end of 2008, which is a single window for all import and export procedures, is pushing us nationally to complete our national single window by the end of this year. So this is something we hope can facilitate trade much better.
This is the ASEAN single window for custom clearance. In many countries today, you can see the need to go to many different agencies just to get your papers to bring in products or to send out products. What the ministers of ASEAN economic ministries and finance ministry, because custom come in the finance ministry, have agreed is to do a single window. Basically, you go to one location, one encounter with the counter personnel, and you get all your rubber stamp and out you go. It's not easy to do that because, like in the case of Indonesia, you have 17,000 islands at high tide, low tide, we don't know how many thousand more. And Philippines too. Many people forget that Southeast Asia is actually very much covered by water. And to reach out to every custom officer in every little port across the whole region is a formidable challenge. But what we are hoping to do now is to use our IT capability, IT infrastructure, computers, and using a common nomenclature, one standard form across the region. So hopefully we can implement this. We have started the pilot between the Philippines and Thailand, and these are two big economies with many agricultural products. We hope we can use that as a good starting point to develop the template into a full ASEAN single window for custom clearance.
Okay, Mr. Ong, what you're basically talking about is trade facilitation, making things work more efficiently, faster, less red tape, etc. Let me get to Mr. Ghosn, if we could. You've heard all the other panelists speak already, off the cuff. These are all government people, top-down people. You, of course, are a businessman. You're from the corporate world. What would you like to see happen more? What more could governments in this part of the world do to make it easier for people like yourselves to do business, stimulate consumption, create jobs, open factories, etc.?
Well, I'm really going to use some of the comments which have been made to pinpoint what's important for the corporate world. Okay. The first one, I think these are comments made, and actually I know it is at the heart of the policy which is followed by Madam President, is priority is to infrastructure. That's very important. And infrastructure is not only about roads and ports. It's also about water, energy. It's also about telecommunication. This is extremely important for business. If infrastructure is judged by the corporate world at the appropriate level, the likelihood of investment is very high. this is a very important point, and it's not very easy. I'm going to tell you why. Because I'm going to come back to some comments which was made by my neighbor. He said we need less planning and more doing. That's what I heard, isn't it? Yeah. So I'm just not inventing something. I'm just using something which was said. That this is all about more execution. And you know very well that, and I don't think, frankly, it's a character of ASEAN. I think it's, unfortunately, everywhere in the world. You know, there is more facility for huge planning and less facility for executing. So we end up, in fact, with wonderful plans executed at 5%, and at the end of the road, the outcome is very weak. What we need is stick with the plans existing. Let's not try to be innovative on the plans, but make more of it a reality. This is something which is important. And frankly, if there is an area in the world where this can be done, I would say it's Asia, because Asia has been, and particularly the Asian corporations, have been developing a very simple system which is becoming a basic management tool, which is plan, do, check, and act, which is PDCA. I mean, when you plan something, then you follow, you do it, then you check, you get the results. If you don't get them, then you're going to react and correct, and then you start again. So PDCA implemented at the level of the government will probably go a long way into bringing what corporations want, which are good trade agreements and good infrastructure.
So are you saying that PDCA needs to still start with the government, still needs to be top down, or are you saying, is this a polite way of saying the government needs to get out of the way a little bit more and let business do it?
No, frankly, I don't think that the solution will come from government getting out of the way, because there are problems that only government can solve.
Okay.
That's it. I mean, obviously, a private sector and corporate world is usually more efficient on something that government has been doing for a while. But there are a lot of new sectors that if government doesn't step in, it's not going to happen. So there is a need for complementary work from government from one side and corporate work from the other side. I'm not saying that, you know, the government should step aside. I think government has usually a great planning. There are a lot of very wise people leading into many countries. What we need is faster execution, faster realization. For example, we need obviously better infrastructure, and we need stronger infrastructure. I think Madam President said yesterday, we had the privilege to have a dinner with her, and somebody asked her, what is the only thing, if you had to you take your presidential wand, I hope I'm not making a scoop, Madam President, if you allow me. You know, if you take a presidential wand and you say, you can make something happen immediately, what would you do? Okay? And everybody was expecting she would come with another plan. She said, I want to do it tomorrow. That's it. And that's exactly what we think. That we need to accelerate the plans and transform them into reality. That's what we need.
Okay, let's get down to specifics on how the Doha trade round, as most of us know, is stalled, maybe even dead in the water. Is there anything more that Asian countries can do to kickstart this process, make sure it does not fall flat?
Well, we need to analyze what are the reasons for which it's stuck. I don't think the answer is at the level of the ASEAN today. I don't remember that the ASEAN is a stumbling block into the discussion, actually a discussion of WTO. But I think the ASEAN has done a great job into opening up the borders between the different countries constituting the ASEAN. And I can tell you that our companies have already made decisions, investment decisions, following the free trade agreement. And when the free trade agreement is done, it's the first encouragement for the corporate world to invest. And the second one is making sure that you have planned for infrastructures and you are really acting on that.
Mr. Yu, if I could come to you and ask you about whether there is a leadership deficit in terms of trade out here in this part of the world. On the surface, it would seem no. I mean, Singapore's probably been one of the most, I think, progressive in striving ahead with bilateral agreements as the whole multilateral system seems to be stalling.
Well, in the ASEAN summit, we have called for acceleration of Doha. We have recognized the stumbling blocks. They are not ASEAN. They are really, first you have the problem between Europe and America. Then you have the problem of India. And they are, we work with America and APEC, we work with India and the East Asian Summit, we've made our calls. But recognizing that we are not the culprits in the slowdown of Doha, we're just moving forward. We're moving forward with our bilateral and regional trade agreements so that we will push for integration, Doha or no Doha.
All right. BG, if I could come to you. Singapore assumes the chair of ASEAN later this year, in just, 1.5 months or so. And I suppose we could get comments from Mr. Ong as well. When it first started, a bulwark against communism, ostensibly. Umpteen years on, here we are, 2007, 10 members trying to add with the pluses, others as well. 2 of the 10 are still nominally communist. What concerns me, and I want to get Mr. Yo's thoughts on this, there's a piece in Newsweek, and it's been reported in other outlets as well, that Myanmar is slowly but consciously starting to accumulate the pieces, the parts that could lead to either nuclear power or possibly weaponization. Is that something that concerns you? It is an ASEAN member. Mr. Yo.
I'm sorry, were you referring to Myanmar?
Myanmar, yes.
Nuclear program in Myanmar?
It has been reported, sir.
I'll be surprised if that is high up on the list of priorities. I think there are many other problems to overcome first. The Foreign Minister told me that they're having a Constitutional Convention meeting quite soon to settle the main pieces in the new constitution. After that, drafting will proceed and a referendum for it to be accepted, then elections. How long all that will take, we don't know. We are not holding our breath, but we just urge them on. I can't believe that a nuclear program is high up on the list of priorities. They have enough problems of their own.
All right, fair enough. Mr. Ong, getting back to Mr. Ghosn's, the point that Mr. Ghosn highlighted, less planning, more doing, more execution. How is ASEAN managing the situation where it has grown quite a bit? You have a lot of members who ostensibly might not be able to help you with the planning, and may actually be in the way, to be blunt, in terms of execution. How do you get them on board? How can they actually help?
Well, 2 things that we have always done in ASEAN. Number 1 is that we don't believe in having 2-track or 2-tier ASEAN. So every time we do anything, we say everybody follow the same objective. We have a common destination. Of course, some of the less developed economy will take longer time. And what we invented creatively is what we call flexibility. We allow certain extra time for people to implement some of the plans. But psychologically and practically, it is very important to agree that everything we do in ASEAN, we just have 1 track, 1 tier. There's no such thing as the less developed have a formal 2nd track to follow. Of course, in implementation, there is big problem. And so our emphasis in ASEAN country today is on what we call narrowing the developmental gap, which is capacity building and developing of our human resources. But in the wake of all these competitive forces that have come upon us, we have now started to look at how we can go 1 step further. In other words, not just on developing the software in our respective economy and society, but also to help in developing the infrastructure necessary for us to accomplish our ASEAN plan. So that will be the most dramatic move in the next 2 to 3 years. And in this respect, our finance ministers and our economic ministers and our foreign ministers have all agreed that what we used to taboo in the past, that is, don't talk about spending a lot of money on infrastructure development, we are prepared to amend our approach to this. We need to develop infrastructure which will contribute to the connection of all our 10 economies together with the other countries. The other important thing is that ASEAN, although we do a lot of planning, as Carlos said, we now have to do implementation for the simple reason our partners from China, Japan, Korea, India, Australia, and New Zealand now can't wait for us because we are now doing free trade area agreement with them. And if you talk to these chaps with the free trade area agreement and agree to do certain things, these guys are not going to be flexible like our own ASEAN brothers and sisters. They expect you to follow up with every committed milestone. So we have now reached a point where we accept that if we are going to be serious player, having all these FTA with other trading partners of ASEAN, we need to go forward and implement them. So you see this idea about the single window. It is basically in response to the expectation of ASEAN as we negotiate all these FTA with our partners. So these are the two important elements which I thought would contribute to a much more effective implementation of ASEAN plan. Number one, we don't have two track, one single tier. And number two, as we negotiate FTA with all these countries, we need to do our part of the deal.
Mr. Kim, let me bring you in. Didn't mean to leave you out there. Just a few days ago, I was doing some reading and finding out about these big bang financial reforms that South Korea is planning, regulators there. Maybe better late than never. London's been through its big bang financial reforms. Japan has as well. How important are these reforms to South Korea, to bringing down the walls, let banks play in the brokerage business, insurers, everybody get into everybody else's backyard? How important is that for South Korea, for your markets, for your economy, for helping eventually to narrow the rich-poor divide?
Would you cover that because there was a noise in that.
I'm sorry, you couldn't hear?
Yeah.
Okay, let me just repeat the question. Yeah. South Korea is undertaking big bang financial reforms, bringing down the walls, letting different sectors in the business get into each other's territory. How important are these reforms, late though they may be, for the economy and eventually for narrowing the rich-poor gap?
Yes. I'm actually not a very specialist in financial matters, but as you told that we are now breaking the walls between the financial institutions like bank and insurance companies and some private equity funds. And this is very important to strengthen our financial fundamentals because the companies or institutions they could be enlarged, getting more competitiveness. And then, that means that having global competitiveness. And this is very important and very fundamental reforms to strengthen the Korean economy. And I think it will work very good.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, folks, we've probably spent enough time talking among ourselves. I'd like to open it up to the floor now. Again, just housekeeping. Please raise your hand. There will be microphones around, which you can use. We can ask you first to identify yourself. Second, to tell us where you're from or who you're affiliated with. And thirdly, if you could be specific about who you are addressing the question to. Thank you. The gentleman in the front, please. Mr. Romilo, yes.
I'd like to address this to the entire panel. The topic was leadership. The collapse of the Doha round has been discussed. FTAs and regional FTAs has been referred to as the noodle bowl effect. And that in another life, Minister Pangesti said that was badness. Now, I'd like to see, going to leadership again of ASEAN. Will ASEAN take the lead and find another alternative? Or to be more precise, will ASEAN follow and take the lead in a free trade area for Asia Pacific?
This is for Mr. Ong.
Why not? Yeah. In our argument in the Secretariat, my professional colleague and I, we say the more the merrier. It may be a spaghetti bowl or it may be a noodle bowl, but it is carbohydrate for our well-being. So we are prepared to do more, but much depends on the leadership. What is important to bear in mind, colleagues here, is that free trade area is not an end in itself. It is basically a mean to an end. So of course there will be difficulties in negotiating this multiple free trade area, whether at bilateral level or multilateral level. But at the moment, we are trying to do some innovative things like maybe update our rules of origin, which will help to pull together all the multiple FTA. Rules of origin is a thorny issue. If we can have every country in the region which have FTA negotiation agreeing to a new approach, there are many ideas out there in the market. We can actually improve on the spaghetti bowl. Maybe we will have a neater connection with all these multiple bilateral and multilateral FTAs.
Yeah.
Ms. Wangestu, please.
Yes, I'd like to respond to the very provocative question from Mr. Romulo. I think the question was, will ASEAN take a lead in an Asia-Pacific trade area? I can't speak for ASEAN, but I will speak from an Indonesian perspective. I think the answer is no, in the sense that we feel, as Mr. Ong has already mentioned, the centrality should be ASEAN, and in pursuing regional agreements, we will be prioritizing the centrality of ASEAN. And that's already happening on the ground. If you talk about Asia-Pacific trade areas, it's still going to take a long time. Needless to say that we haven't even decided at the APEC level whether we want to make APEC a negotiating forum or not. I think that begs the question, the very fundamental question of where we want to take APEC. But going back to the centrality of ASEAN, there's already the ASEAN Economic Community. Yes, we have to make it happen, as I think my two neighbors here have been saying, plan, do, and act. I think we need to really do and implement, so that ASEAN is not agree first and talk after, which has been the popular acronym for ASEAN. It's already happening, We have bilateral agreements on the ground already with Japan for the major ASEAN countries. You already have China and ASEAN and Korea FTAs. So that's already happening. And now I think the big question out there for the corporate world especially, how do we make sure that that is really going to support a regional production center and not, create different regulations, different rules that will which will inhibit the flow of capital and division of production, which will benefit us each individually as well as the corporate world. So I think priority, I would say, is still ASEAN as the center. And eventually, if you add them all up, you will have an Asia-Pacific trade area.
Mr. Yeo.
Bobby, sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. I used to be trade minister, so I have some interest in the subject. I don't know whether it's possible to achieve the grand bargain in the WTO. The prospects look bleak. And even if we don't succeed this time, we should keep it on the back burner and let it hibernate until conditions are more propitious. In the meantime, we should help to create a competitive dynamic in the world. A process of competitive liberalization, so that those who don't liberalize find themselves at a disadvantage versus those who do. In the end, countries act in their own self-interest, and they must be convinced that on balance, liberalization is a better option for them. ASEAN is in fact playing a shrewd game. We are now playing three tables: ASEAN plus 3, EAS, APEC. And I would say, let's push for free trade areas for all of them. ASEAN plus 3, so that we are more integrated with China, Japan, Korea. EAS, so that we bring in Australia, New Zealand, and India as well. And APEC, the free trade area of the Asia Pacific, so that we bring in North America and South America. If we play this in a cunning way, all the big powers will be nice to us in ASEAN. Because we use one against the other. If you do not want to play, we move with the others. Then you are at a disadvantage. This is what we mean by the centrality of ASEAN. And at the core of it is that we ourselves in ASEAN must be united. And right now, because of the challenge of China and India, each and every one of us among the 10 countries is convinced that we are better off with an integrated ASEAN. We can grow faster with an integrated ASEAN than if we were to compete against others singly. That's the key.
Mr. Romulo, are you on board with this plan? Mrs. President, please. Yes.
Bobby, when you talk about Asia Pacific, you're talking about one giant economy that's not included in East Asia, and that is the United States. And so the Asia Pacific free trade area is being discussed in the APEC summit rather than in the ASEAN or East Asian summit. And in the last APEC summit, there was a consensus that we should move towards an Asia Pacific trade area. But if you're talking about ASEAN as a talk shop, all the more APEC is a talk shop. It doesn't even have a permanent secretariat. However, there is an opportunity this coming year in the Singapore summit, because this is also the jubilee of our relations with the U.S. And this is an opportunity for ASEAN once again to take the lead in that particular direction that we could possibly take in the future when we have the U.S. ASEAN summit here in Singapore.
Martin, I just want to add one development recently, and that is that the 16 countries participating in the East Asia Summit, the leaders of the 16 countries agreed that we can do a study on how to bring all the 16 economies together under what we call a comprehensive economic partnership in East Asia. As usual, we like all these acronyms, CPEA, CEPEA, and how this connect with the ASEAN plus 3 FTA, if we can do one, and how does it connect with the APEC idea of an Asia-Pacific free trade area. So the study has already been launched. We just had a meeting in Tokyo, and eminent scholars from the 16 countries are now putting their head together. We do not know where this will lead to, but we thought that it is a good thing, as Madam President said, we try to engage as many of these economies as possible and bring them in so that we can have a stake for everybody. After all, what we are talking is to enlarge the pie, the economic pie that we have in this region. And as this WEF forum, WEF meeting show, everybody is focused on Asia. So how can we now enlarge the pie? And in the process, we engage North America, South America, and Western countries, European Union. Thank you.
All right. Other questions? Let's see here. There's a gentleman right in the back holding up his headphones. Oh, I'm sorry, in the middle.
There's a lady there.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my name is Adrianus Moy from Pelita Harapan University in Jakarta, Indonesia. I have a very broad question addressed to all the distinguished speakers here. I think there's no question that Asia is still the champion as far as economic progress, as far as achieving higher economic growth. I think one of the challenges already mentioned is how to make that progress, the benefit of that progress, accrue to all the people, including the poor ones. But I would like to add another challenge here, and that is all the countries in the area, in the Asia Pacific, are also pursuing democracy. And we know that sometimes there are conflicts between economic reforms and democracy. So the question is how to balance, how best to pursue the two things. I think the experience of countries in Asia perhaps are diverse. Many of the countries here, of course, pursue economic progress first before pursuing full democracy. Now, I think maybe India is perhaps quite the opposite, pursuing democracy first and then economic progress later on. Philippines and Indonesia perhaps trying to pursue the two things simultaneously at the same time. But it takes us a long time to move forward. So I would like to hear the comments from the various speakers here, what is the best way to pursue the two things, democratization and economic liberalization, economic reform?
Okay, it's an interesting question. Before we get to hear from the government leaders, what I'd like to do is turn to Mr. Ghosn and ask him from a corporate business perspective, does it really matter to you, honestly, whether a country is democratic or not, free or not, as long as business works?
Well, thank you for the provocative question. No, it matters for us because, you know, businesses are about making a trade-off between short-term, mid-term, and long-term opportunities. And it's true that every time you are moving, you are investing, or you are starting to develop yourself into a country, the fact that it is a democracy gives you a sense that it's going to be more stable than if it's not a democracy. That's it. So it's a, yes, you're right, if you consider short-term preoccupation. On short-term preoccupation, whatever is the regime doesn't impact you so much. But when we make an investment, particularly car maker, when they establish a plan, they establish for the next 50 years. They cannot only take in consideration the next 3 years, they have to consider what's going to happen 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And it's true that when you are entering a country with established, stable democracy, you feel better about it because we know that, the perception is that you have more certainty that the rules are stable, that the reference are not going to change, and you're not going to have a surprise. That's an important point. The other thing I would like to mention, because in fact the person who asked the question said, you know, how about democracy, and is there any kind, what is the priority between pursuing democracy and economic development? I still think also there is a third factor that we should not forget. A lot of people saying, you know, Asia is going to grow, it's a given. There is a third factor that if we not pay enough attention to, it may not happen, and it may be a surprise. It is everything which is relative to the environment. Water, electricity, energy is extremely important. It is becoming in some countries a critical issue. And if there is no perceived credible solution brought to it, it may refrain some investments from global corporations.
Fair enough. Mr. Kim, you wanted to speak.
I just want to say that what I believe. I think that the economy is changing to more and more knowledge-based economies. That means that we need more creativity, more imaginations, and more involvement of ordinary people in the economy and in politics. And that means that the democracy is inevitable for economic growth, especially for sustainable growth.
Ma'am, with the shawl, had a question?
Thank you so much. Erika Mann from Germany, member of the European Parliament, spokesperson on trade for my political group. I have one question. I always wonder, and I would love to address this to the Minister of Indonesia. Actually, talking about the multilateral round, I wonder if the methodology sometimes it's maybe not really adapting to the globalization process. And I wonder what you would say if we would maybe ask for more plurilateral agreement. We have so few plurilateral agreements in the moment. And actually the one which is in place for the telecommunication and information industry worked quite well over 10 years. And I wonder if this wouldn't be maybe a better answer for the future, because it would bring together various interests of countries, various capabilities and capacities, and maybe the way we are negotiating in the moment, it's probably too complex for all countries actually to profit from and to understand it in the full way. And I just would love to listen to your answer. Thank you so much.
Well, I think one of the difficulties of the current negotiations, as you correctly pointed out, is trying to get 150 countries now to agree. And that definitely has been what is plaguing us. And obviously there are a few key players in there that need to make the move first before the others can move. In one sense, as you know, the negotiations are what we call a single undertaking. That's why plurilateral for the whole process would not be feasible, because you're always trading off what you're getting in agriculture with what you're getting in other areas, etc., and etc. So I think your suggestion for a plurilateral agreement where only some countries agree to it first and wait and the others can opt in later is probably not workable if you're talking about the whole series of negotiations. But I do think there's merit for the plurilateral system to work for services because in a sense that, especially for developing countries, many of us are not quite ready yet for services liberalization fully. While we can adopt some of the domestic regulation and transparency requirements, we can't really go full speed on the liberalization. So I think for something like services, plurilateral agreements actually make a lot of sense, and this will hopefully, because it's actually one of the most difficult areas for developing countries to make commitments to. So I do feel that the advantage of plurilateral agreements is that you can, as developing countries, participate in the negotiations without making the commitments just as yet. So I do believe that can be workable for services.
All right, let's try and take one from the other side of the room there. The gentleman in the black holding up the pamphlet, sir.
Thank you. I'm Ralph Costa from the Pacific Forum, CSIS in Honolulu, a nonprofit foreign policy research institute. There have been many references to ASEAN being in the driver's seat and ASEAN leading, but who is leading ASEAN? And in what direction is ASEAN going? There's been reference to the charter, but as I understand it, even if the charter is approved in the current form, and all indications are it'll be significantly watered down, you're still going to have 10 sets of hands on the steering wheel, which I think makes it very difficult to drive. To overplay the analogy, you have maybe 2 or 3 feet on the gas and all the rest on the brake. So how does this move forward? I would also ask that there were numerous references to ASEAN +1, +3, +6. We were an hour into the program before APEC was even mentioned, and then I think somewhat disparagingly, but where does APEC fit in all of this? And can APEC be a tool to move for the Doha forward? Thank you.
All right, thank you. First from Mr. Ong, and then perhaps it would be useful to hear from the incoming chair of Singapore. Mr. Ong first.
Well, I don't think that there are too many feet on the brake. I think there are too many hands on the driving wheel. I think that what has happened so far in the drafting process reflect two important elements which many of our leadership might not have fully digested. Number one, there is insufficient attention paid to the development of what we call non-governmental bodies. The fact is the growth of civil society groups in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia, is phenomenal. And everyone now wants to have a say. And when we first embarked on the drafting of the charter, we used this mechanism called Imminent Persons Group. They were actually proceeding more from the basis of policymaker, from the standpoint of bureaucratic policymaker, standpoint of political leadership. But as they went into the process, they absorbed a lot of inputs from the non-governmental organization and the civil society groups. Now, how do we balance all these different contributions from the NGOs and the civil society organization? The second development, which I think not enough attention was given to it, or not enough weight was given to it, is that we are now developing a charter with 10 countries. 4 of them, namely Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam, no longer play second or back seat role. They now come forward, and because they say this charter is their only chance to put the ideas that they have as 4 countries who joined the association later than the rest of the 6, to input into what shape and how things connected with ASEAN will be like for the future. So in the drafting process, we found that this is actually what the European Union called the implication of enlargement. Nobody ever studied the enlargement process in ASEAN because the enlargement only covered 4 countries. And at that point, insignificant economies were the 4 new members. But the fact is now, as we draft the charter, these 4 countries, not just Myanmar, by the way, the reports have been in the media that Myanmar has imposed its will on. No, it's beyond Myanmar. It's every of the new members, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. They see things in a very long-term view because they are in ASEAN for the perpetuity. So they want to develop a charter which serves their national interests while not neglecting the ASEAN perspective. So we see this process as a very challenging one. Nevertheless, we believe that at the end of the day, the product is not going to be much of the same status quo. At least in 2 areas, we will get better outcome. Number one, the formalization of the institutional behavior. That is something which we don't have now. And number 2, there will be certain provision which will enable our leadership to take effective action in certain areas if there is what we call non-compliance. We move away from all the old buzzwords like sanction, voting in decision making, and so on and so forth. I think experiences elsewhere in the world show that such kind of nomenclature give rise to a lot of nightmares which may not be there. So we move away from those, and I think, give it a chance, we can see a very innovative approach to this charter drafting. What you get now is only the bureaucratic feedback, and so far ASEAN has developed very effectively in the last 3 to 4 years because of our leadership. President Arroyo is one of our leaders, and they don't take all these bureaucratic inputs just at face value. So I will hold my judgment until November when the Singapore summit will endorse the draft charter, and then we see from there. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Yeo.
Never before in human history have we seen the emergence of major powers without that emergence being accompanied by wars and political conflicts. And we are seeing now in Asia the emergence of 2 very big poles, China and India. And the biggest challenge for us is to ensure a continuing period of peace and development in Asia. If we can maintain it for another generation, the entire region, half the world, would have been brought to a completely different level. If we play our role right in ASEAN, engage China and India, moderate their differences, bring them into a regional architecture which gives everyone a fair deal, we will achieve that. So yes, you're right that we are not an F1 driver, but we are a safe driver. And all the other passengers in the car appreciate that, especially China and India. Most importantly, it is in our objective in ASEAN to ensure that this vehicle moves safely into the future with all passengers happy. You mentioned about APEC. APEC is very important because if the rise of Asia results in a division down the middle of the Pacific, there'll be a whole new set of problems arising. The US, because of the Second World War, because of the Korean and Vietnam Wars, is entangled in 100 different ways in the economy, the politics, the strategic situation on the Western Pacific. And a continuing US presence is very important for the maintenance of this peace and stability. The central relationship, which we have to watch very carefully, is that between the US and China. And APEC is one organization which brings all the countries around the Pacific together regularly, creating a habit of consultation, enabling leaders, ministers, and officials to know each other at a personal level. I remember in April 2001, when the Hainan spy plane incident happened, and relations suddenly became very tense between Beijing and Washington. It was APEC which continued to bring them together. In June, when the trade ministers met in Shanghai, and U.S. Trade Representative Bob Zoellick attended that meeting, he was the first cabinet secretary to go after the Hainan incident. And it enabled problems to be overcome, contact to be re-established. So APEC is of the greatest strategic importance to us. And even as we embark upon the construction of an Asian architecture, we must never neglect APEC as in fact the overarching premier organization.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are just coming up to full time. We've got time for one more question, I believe. We've got a lot of hands up, though, so it's going to be hard to choose. I'll tell you what, we've done left, we've done right. Let's go right down the middle. The gentleman holding up the coffee cup there.
I knew I had to hold something for you to notice. My name is Masoud Basiri from Consistel. We have offices in just about every ASEAN country, and one of the key drivers for moving great leaders throughout these countries is international schools, to have great schools with quality, capacity, and affordability from a business point of view and from the leader's point of view. So while you're going through the challenges of the economics of your countries, please also invest in schools for children so they don't have to pay $25,000 for elementary schools, as well as the capacities that are required for the qualities. That will be one of the very big factors for moving good leaders with families around in the countries.
Right, thank you for the comment. Is there a question in there somewhere, or would you like anybody in particular?
Just a recommendation.
Just a recommendation. All right. I'll just open up to the panel. Would anybody like to respond to that?
Well, when I was saying earlier that now that we have our revenues, because of our painful economic reforms, we'd like to transform the pain into gains in human and physical infrastructure. And when I talk about human infrastructure, I do mean education, healthcare, and training. So we are spending already, and we will be spending more, billions of billions in these things: education, healthcare, and training.
All right.
I'd like to just add
sure,
that countries like Indonesia, I think Malaysia and other ASEAN countries are also doing similar things. What we are introducing, on top of the $25,000 international school types, local schools are now allowed to introduce national plus programs, which charge higher than the national schools, but they add English, they add other things, and there are already a number of private schools in Indonesia which are doing that.
Just very quickly, this is a personal interest because we were talking about this in the ante-room with Mr. Ghosn. Innovation, we've just been talking about schools, good schools, education systems, etc. For the people that you hire, the lifeblood of any company, especially for a car company, engineering, design, etc. How do you judge innovation, whether someone has come from a background and schooled in a background which will meet your needs?
Very badly. we judge them very badly. Yeah, because one of the major problems of global corporations when they hire, particularly in a culture or in a country which they are not very familiar with, is not to be too much influenced by the familiarity. That means you have a tendency to give preference to somebody who speaks good English compared to somebody who doesn't speak good English. You have a tendency to give preference to somebody. I mean, the reference of familiarity. You're familiar with something, you have a tendency to go towards familiarity. But familiarity doesn't ensure creativity or innovation. So, frankly, I think this is a process which is not very well handled today by large corporations. But coming back to the proposal which was made, I think it's a very good proposal that, for example, at the level of the ASEAN, there is a concerted effort, not only at the level of the school, but if you take universities, to try to put some selected university, whatever it's engineering or in level of business, as a world class. That means so when you're talking, for example, about MBAs, you don't talk only about Harvard and Stanford and INSEAD or London Economic School, you also talk about one specific entity in the ASEAN. When you're talking about engineering school, you don't talk only about Tsinghua University or Tokyo University, but you talk about one particular university somewhere in the ASEAN. And this probably will require all the countries putting together and deciding we want this particular institution, whatever country it is, to become a gold international standard.
All right, Mr. Ghosn, thank you so much. Folks, we're going to have to wrap it up. Before we do that, though, I'd like to go to each of our panelists and give you 1 minute each to sum it all up. The bottom line, the question, the whole point of our discussion here this morning was leadership. Is there a deficit? If so, where and what can you do about it? With 1 minute, starting with Mr. Kim.
Instead of responding to that, I just want to respond to the question raised by Flo. I think that the education and schooling is very important. In case of Korea, we think that the education policies or accumulation of human capital is probably the best economic policy. Then because we think that now state or the government are losing the power, the authorities in comparing with the past. The best thing we can do is the accumulation of the human capital. We emphasize it a lot. That's what I want to say.
All right. Mr. Keio.
We live in exciting times, and the coming years in Asia will be full of surprises. There will be institutional changes, there will be political changes, there will be economic changes. But as we prepare the next generation, we can't just feed them rules and regulations or canned knowledge. We make sure that they have a good value system which is attuned to the global world, and we make sure that they have basic knowledge, the 3 R's, IT, and the ability to learn. And then we set them on the voyage. So countries which pay attention to education and value systems, I think they will do well. Those which neglect this area, they are not in the game.
Mrs. President.
Well, the 21st century is bringing us truly global problems. Not only economic integration, but also environmental degradation, pockets of poverty, and the continuing threat of terrorism. And these require global solutions and regional leadership, not just national leadership. So the future belongs to those who recognize the need for common ground and common solutions. But I don't think that there is a deficit in regional leadership. For instance, you have ASEAN, which has proven itself quite effective in the last 40 years of its existence. And then even the upcoming giants like China and India recognize their increasing obligation to provide leadership alongside the mature giants like Japan and Korea. And even there you have the mechanism of the ASEAN +3 and the ASEAN and the East Asia Summit. Therefore, what is important now for regional leadership is to strengthen the institutions that already exist, like ASEAN and its permutations, like the ASEAN +3 and the East Asia Summit. And if we move in this direction with greater acceleration, I am very bullish about Asia and our ability to lead the world and what has to be done to solve the common problems.
Ms. Mengistu.
Well, I'll go back to where I started. I think East Asia should and must play a continued leadership role in ensuring global and regional integration. And that's a dual role. I think on the crucial weeks ahead for the WTO talks, we must be participating, we must be contributing. We are not the culprits, I think, as we were talking about earlier, but we must be contributing and encouraging the process in the next 2 months, really. That's the crucial period. And at the same time, given the proliferation of regional and bilateral agreements, we must play a leadership role in coming out with a model, if you like, and managing these proliferation in a way that is going to be leading to free trade agreements that really free up trade and not really lead to what is normally known as the spaghetti bowl effect, where you have this crisscrossing of agreements with different regulations, different standards, different rules of origin, different tariff schedules, which is going to cause innumerous headaches to the corporate world. So I think that's the leadership role that East Asia and ASEAN within East Asia must take to ensure that we manage this well.
Thank you so much. Mr. Ghosn.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt on the fact that this century is going to be an Asian century. Opportunities are here. Everybody agrees on it. The question is how you're going to do it, how fast you're going to do it. It's interesting to see that when you go to all the institutions who try to track the future, and you see what other countries are going to come after Brazil, Russia, India, and China as an engine for international growth. Many of these countries are located in Asia. So the only question is how you're going to do it, how fast you're going to do it. The problems that we are facing are huge. Some of them we mentioned today. They are relative to the ASEAN One Voice and the ASEAN entity, but they are relative also to how you bring Japan, China, Russia, India, and the ASEAN to Korea to common position, not only on regional issue but global issue. But we're still at the beginning of the century. We're in 2007. We still have 92 years to go.
And then finally, Mr. Ong.
Well, I just wish that ASEAN leaders can do more to talk about the good stories and the success story that we have in Southeast Asia. There are many good stories, and in the last 1 year under the Philippine chairmanship of ASEAN, we have heard many more of these good stories in the world, in the UN in particular. So perhaps in the coming 1 year under Singapore chairmanship, we can hear more of the good stories. And we are not unique in having these kind of challenges. Southeast Asia is part of the world, and other regions in the world also encounter this. So if we can have our leaders to go out there to explain more of our challenges and our success story in particular, I think it will help to contribute to a more appreciated picture of Southeast Asia.
All right, Mr. Young, thank you very much. All right, folks, we've just come up against time. We'll have to leave it there. I'd like to thank all of our panelists this morning. We've just been hearing from Ong Keng Yong, Secretary General of ASEAN. To his right, Carlos Ghosn, President and CEO of Nissan and Renault. Mari Pangestu, next to him, the Minister of Trade for Indonesia. The President of the Republic of the Philippines, Mrs. Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. Giorgio, the Foreign Minister of Singapore, and Mr. Kim Byung-jun, Chairman of the Presidential Commission on Policy Planning from South Korea. All of you, thank you very much. It's been very interesting talking with you. And folks, thank you for coming, for listening, and for talking to us.